How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Deciduous Bonsai podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Robson, a bonsai professional in Portland, Oregon that specializes in deciduous trees. And I'm joined by my student, friend, and moderator on the bonsai subreddit, Maciek.
Hello.
All right, so today we have an exciting episode in store. We are doing a Q&A. Now, we solicited questions for this Q&A a few episodes back, and now we compiled all those together, and should be a fun episode.
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions, so why don't we just dive right in? The first few questions are going to be about fertilizer mostly, or related to our products that don't matter episode.
All right, I'm a big proponent of fertilizing, so
yeah, okay.
We have a lot of fun stuff to talk about.
All right, let's get into it.
Okay.
So the first question is from Shears. And Shears asks, what type of fertilizer do we use on fruiting trees when they are fruiting? So NPK, organic versus liquid. And then generally for the whole arc of the year, what is the fertilizer regime for fruiting trees from spring to fall?
Yeah, so Shears, I use the same fertilizer on flowering and fruiting trees that I use for everything in the garden. And I'm mostly using Miracle-Gro with some fish emulsion on occasion.
So is that the baseline strategy we've always talked about before, where we're microdosing throughout the season?
That's right. We are microdosing via our dosatron. I have a full episode or two on the regular YouTube channel about that, so you can check out if you want some specifics on what we do with fertilizing. But via the dosatron, we are using a microdose level of fish emulsion and mostly Miracle-Gro, occasional fish emulsion on the trees. That's the baseline level for everything in the garden. And then things that need more fertilizer, like flowering and fruiting trees, get kind of a once a week or once every other week kind of full dose, not a microdose, a full dose application of fish emulsion or something else.
And is that throughout the growing season, or are you strategizing with regards to the fruiting and flowering itself?
That's throughout the growing season. So we'll do that kind of starting in the spring during bud break, and this is for all my fertilizing. Always start during bud break and go all the way until just past leaf drop.
Okay. The next question is from David, who asks, when you say that you use Miracle-Gro, do you mean the regular old chemical blue stuff, or is there a preference for the organic version of Miracle-Gro?
Yeah, I'm using regular Miracle-Gro, the most basic.
The blue stuff.
Yeah, the blue crystal stuff that you buy in the bags. It looks like the meth from Breaking Bad. So we're using that blue crystal Miracle-Gro powder. It's just the normal formula. It's their basic OG product.
Got it. So go with the Heisenberg stuff.
Yeah.
Brian V has a few questions.
Okay.
So we'll kind of rapid fire through them. First, how much liquid fertilizer to apply when trees are of different sizes and different pots? And when fertilizing, do we still let water run out of the pot?
Yeah. So I do flush the pot completely. So because we're microdosing, I don't have any concern or worry about flushing things out of the
salt
the container.
buildup or anything like that.
Yeah. So with microdosing, we're just doing a normal, thorough watering until you have water coming out of the drainage holes. And what was the first part of that question?
The first part of it was different trees, different sizes, different size pots. Are we varying fertilizer strategy for that at all in terms of dosage and time?
I'm not. I'm as long as you're watering thoroughly, it doesn't matter what size, shape, size the pots are. It's same fertilizer for everything.
So the microdose is kind of this nice universal.
The microdose is a nice broad spectrum thing for everything, and that just provides baseline nutrition. So for about 70-80% of the garden, that's going to be all the nutrients that those plants need. For things that you're trying to grow a thick trunk on, which I think we have some trunk growing questions later in this episode.
Yep.
Or for things that are weak, which I think we also have some weak tree questions later in this episode. Or for flowering and fruiting trees. For anything that needs kind of extra fertilizer, we'll supplement that once a week or once every other week.
But not by size.
But not by size.
Stage might matter.
Stage of development might, yeah. Typically young trees, you might add more fertilizer to. And this is the one thing that people don't keep in mind is old trees you might actually add more fertilizer to. When you have a very, very ramified, highly developed deciduous bonsai, something with a lot of ramification and growth tips, those plants have so many growth tips that they require an abundance of energy to get good growth out of each tip. So if you don't want to lose branches on a highly refined trees, upping the fertilizer is kind of integral to keeping and sustaining that ramification.
So the next one from Brian is, are the fertilizers with the same ratios but different magnitudes simply diverted or diluted versions of each other? So for example, is a 20-20-20 fertilizer just a 5-5-5 fertilizer that's been multiplied a couple times?
Yeah. So what I'd say about that is, yes, but when you dilute the macronutrients, the 3 numbers that you see on the front of the packaging, you're also diluting the micronutrients that are in there too. So
and they're listed somewhere else on the label.
And they're listed somewhere else on the label. And if you're using chemical fertilizer, it's probably going to be well balanced and have a lot of those things. So while you might be cutting the macronutrients down to the appropriate level, you might be creating nutrient deficiencies in your tree for a lot of micronutrients. So that's why it's maybe not a good idea to buy something hot and dilute it down. Unless you're doing something like microdosing where they're just getting, a diluted amount, kind of continuously.
You're just spreading it, but you're actually effectively doing the same dose.
That's right.
Yeah. So another one from Brian in this list. We talk about 5-1-1 and 6-1-1, and Brian says, well, that must mean that he's giving 5 or 6 times less nitrogen by volume than he should be. Why is it better to have the P and K lower than the N? Why is the N, the nitrogen value, supposed to be high with the other 2 lower?
Yeah, so nitrogen is the most ephemeral of the nutrients, from my understanding.
It doesn't stick around for very long.
It doesn't stick around long, and so it's the thing that's going to be depleted the most from the soil. The other component of that is that it's the most important for every cellular process in a plant. So the nitrogen is going to be used up, and it's the most important thing, plus it dissipates the most in the soil environment. So for those 2 reasons, we like using more nitrogen than anything else.
Right.
One of the most useless fertilizers out there is like a 0-10-10 or something like that, because that there's some horticultural myths about that. We can talk about some horticultural myths later in this episode, but yeah, that's for bonsai purposes, we want to use kind of a higher percentage nitrogen in every application. That's why Miracle-Gro has that built in. Another product, if you don't want to use Miracle-Gro, is Grow Big by Fox Farm. That's another one. Again, they're 6-4-4, so just a little bit more nitrogen than everything else. So yeah, choosing your fertilizer product wisely, and then just using that kind of as a steady kind of baseline product.
So in a similar vein of working with the NPK values, if somebody's using these even ratio ones where the NPK are the same, so it's like 10-10-10 or 20-20-20, to make up for the deficit in nitrogen, should we now add a 5-0-0?
Yeah.
To kind of get to that nitrogen biased.
Yeah, I think in that case, it's just better to use up the remaining product that you have and then just buy one that's better proportion for plant growth. So I don't think doing this chemistry math is gonna.
Yeah, we might get in trouble there if we start to add different things too. Because of the other additives that we might be using.
That's right.
And then what is the difference between the capability between the full-on expensive AF dosatron and the cheapo Easy Flow or other Amazon alternatives that are sort of common out there?
So I have a dosatron, you have some Easy Flow, so we can talk about that. But one of the main things is, I think you get what you pay for.
Yeah,
and so I've used cheap stuff in the past. I've used siphons for years. I've used other products. They last up until a point, and then they break. And so.
So that's the main thing is it's like industrial strength, like serious workload every day.
Exactly.
Lots and lots of water, lots and lots of salt.
Yeah. Not something cheap that's going to have to be replaced every year, every other year, something like that. The thing that I love about my dosatron is that it is incredibly precise and consistent. So when I'm using it, if the pressure of the hose gets cut in half, the dosatron ratio doesn't get cut in half. It's super precise. I think they actually use this in veterinary applications as well, where they're applying either medication or some products to animals where precision is maybe a little bit more important than us fertilizing, but. I just like the precision of it. I like the sustainability of it. I know people have had and used dosatrons, every day for 5-10 years, and they're still growing
The
strong.
workhorse.
So
Yeah.
it's a good workhorse.
One thing I would add to that is at the pre-bonsai farm that our friend John runs, we have done electroconductivity tests on the end of the hose after the dosatron. Even so, he'll measure. We'll get that number. Maybe it'll say 800 or 1,000 or something like that. From the measuring device, and then we'll water like hundreds of trees. Like hundreds of gallons of water. It'll take like 40 minutes to do the whole watering, or an hour. You come back, you measure that value again from the end of the hose, and it is tack sharp exactly the same. Because the dosatron isn't diluting the fertilizer reservoir. The fertilizer reservoir is its own undiluted thing that's slowly going down, but the amount of fertilizer that's going into the hose is very consistent right up until the moment that the bucket
And that's
runs
not how
out of
an
water.
easy flow works, right? How does your
Not
easy
at all.
flow work?
So the easy flow is you have a reservoir of fertilizer, but it is being diluted and diluted and diluted. So you
start strong, you end weak.
your dosage looks like a sawtooth pattern where it's kind of going up and suddenly going down, suddenly going up and then gradually winnowing down, suddenly going up and then gradually winnowing down. So you have to be very careful in how you water with something like that. Whereas with the dosatron, I think it's a lot more just don't even think about it.
It's totally plug and play. You literally just hook it up, and every single student or client that I've worked with who's gotten a dosatron, like I get a text from them 2-3 days later saying, "This is the best thing I've ever done." like this is awesome.
And in terms of the expensive AF part, used ones do exist, and sometimes those deals are good. Not every day, but you should keep your eye on things like that, because sometimes the dosatrons are way cheaper.
My friend Addison down in California, I think he got one off Facebook Marketplace for like $100 or something like that.
Sometimes a hobbyist is just getting rid of their very aggressively acquired set of toys. So then that's your time to just pounce. And then one last question from Brian. What are the installation and requirements for using an injector, for example, backflow preventer and things like that?
The nice thing with a dosatron, it is just plug and play. Like literally, I hook it up. I think about it once a year when I pull it out of winter storage. That's one thing to keep in mind with the dosatron is if you live in an area with a lot of freezes, any water that's inside to protect the components, just bring it inside over the winter. But literally, I think about it once a year. I have 2 screws on my wall, so I screwed into the little bracket. You pop the dosatron on there. You plug in the hose coming in from the house. You plug in the hose going out into your garden hose, and that's as simple as that. I mean, you really just need like a screwdriver, and the one thing you need as well is a female to female hose, because the dosatron has 2 male ends. So you need like whatever length hose to get from your house to the dosatron unit.
Feeder hose or whatever it's called.
Yeah, just a little feeder hose, just to get water into the system, and then you can plug your normal hose into the end. Yeah.
Whereas with the Easy Flow, you do need the backflow preventer, at least if you are keeping the valve open to your house, to the hose bib, and you're kind of keeping it in the sun, and it's building up pressure because of because it is in line with everything. There's no barrier between your reservoir and your water system. If there's pressure in that, it can push back, and so then you do need the backflow preventer. You could actually cause trouble. So I never leave the bib open, right? And I have to think about that if I don't want to use a backflow preventer, which is a little bit annoying. It drops your pressure a bit. It makes a hissing sound or a tooting sound. So,
But if you have a dosatron, you don't have to worry about that.
All right, moving on to another question from Ben V this time.
All right.
Any links for peer-reviewed research into the use of seaweed extracts for plants? I think we mentioned that we didn't believe in these, and that we had actually a source that we believed.
So Dr. Linda Chalker Scott it's either Washington State University or University of Washington. I think it's Washington State University. She is a horticultural PhD. She's really big on applying the science to kind of everyday lives of gardeners and plant people. And so she has a great resource where there's like literally probably 100 different topics, several of them fertilizer oriented, where they look at the myths on seaweed, on
other
compost
amendments
tea,
in general.
and literally like I think I think everybody should go through and just look at that because she really dispels a lot of things that are kind of hype products in the gardening world.
And she is highly literature driven, so I think if you look for her, and also she has a whole bunch of lectures on YouTube as well, even some pretty recent ones. I'm sure you can chase down all the Google Scholar links that you need.
Yeah, so the nice thing about what she does is like she'll look at something like seaweed, and then she summarizes all the science that's been done on it. She has like a nice 2-3 page PDF, so you don't have to literally read articles. She's just quoting them and summarizing them, and then she just kind of gives a nice overview of here's what the science says, here's the claims. Let's see if they hold up. And so she's great, and she's the one that basically said there's not a lot of benefit of seaweed.
And our next question is from Shabnumi, who says, first, hey guys, love your podcast and always look forward to watching new episodes when they come out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please tell your friends. I'm currently using Osmocote Plus in tea bags, but I have seen some growers like Bjorn use 2 different types. So Shabnumi has a mix of pre-bonsai and bonsai, both evergreen and deciduous. What are your thoughts on using just Osmocote and slow release pellets versus maybe adding a low dose of Grow Big or liquid fertilizer? Is that overkill?
Definitely not overkill. In fact, I think using liquid fertilizers is a great way to get nutrients into the plant. I think it works far better than solid fertilizers. One of the benefits of a liquid fertilizer is that it's not going to clog the top layer of your soil. So that top 1/4 inch is not going to get all that gunk and buildup that definitely organic solid fertilizers can provide. You're not going to get as much of that with Osmocote. The thing I hate about Osmocote, or one of the things I hate about Osmocote, or other products similar to it, is that those little casings around the fertilizer, the little shells, they never go away. They just stay there.
Yeah,
versus something like the Miracle-Gro Shake and Feed, if you are going to use something like that, that actually kind of dissolves and disappears.
It's taken away. Yeah.
Yeah. But in general, just speaking about Osmocote, you know, with that specific product for our uses in bonsai, I just find that the little pellets don't seem to provide the nutrients that our trees need. I know there's people have talked about them being heat activated and lots of other things. But
we have doubts about the delivery.
I have doubts about the delivery.
Consistency of the delivery.
I think it's probably a great product for lots of the intended purposes that it says on the bottle. But for us in bonsai specifically, the trees that I've seen where that's the sole source of nutrition look terrible to me. And so they look under-fertilized, they look weak. And the second someone starts using liquid fertilizer, their trees green up and lush up. And so
I've gone through that experience myself.
What was your experience like?
Basically exactly that.
Okay.
In retrospect, it makes me wonder if every tea bag strategy is actually like gross under-fertilization just because of the delivery problems.
I think so.
That it's actually dribbling a lot less than I think.
Yeah.
And so that's why you often see like copious amounts. And there's even a Bjorn video where he has a bunch of black pines in pond baskets, and he's carpeting them with Osmocote.
Yeah.
And I think, oddly enough, I think that is actually that's kind of legit because you really do need a consistent coverage. And I think that's why when you pop open landscape stock from big wholesale growers, you dig through that soil and you find them throughout the soil.
Yeah.
And it's often organic soil where it'll hold on a little bit better to that material. So.
Yeah, I think in a bonsai pot, for some reason that product just doesn't work. I'm sure it's great in the garden and great for other uses, but for what we're doing, I find that doesn't work. I find liquid fertilizers just get into the plant better. Whenever I've been a big proponent of liquid fertilizers for the last probably 5-10 years now, and whenever I have a student switch to liquid fertilizers, they notice a difference. And so it can be more labor, unless you have a dosatron, to apply it, but if you can, find your way to a dosatron or an easy flow or some easy delivery method, then it's really the way to go.
The other experience I had related to this is that when I first started using liquid fertilizer with the low dose method, I think that I got an immediate impression that I was actually over fertilizing.
Yeah. And
my sense of how much fertilizer you need to use was kind of guided by Osmocote. And so initially I was over fertilizing.
Yeah.
And so I realized you can pull back quite a bit when your method is that good when it's so well diffused through the medium that you're feeding into the whole pot. You don't really need to go as, bananas with
You don't have to go
fertilizer.
bananas.
Yeah. So moving on, past fertilizer questions. Now we're going more into growing strategies. Bonsai Druid asks, Bonsai Druid is struggling with a Stewardia,
Okay.
monodelpha. And Bonsai Druid is using BioGold in northwestern Indiana, Zone 5, sheltered over winter, have had this tree for 2 years, not thriving on arrival, stalled for a year. Buds look like they might open soon this year. Initially, leaves turned brown and died, even though it was kept out of direct sunlight. How do we help a struggling Stewardia?
All right. A few things. Stewardia can be tricky. It's not kind of a bulletproof tree like Japanese maple or Trident maple can be in a lot of ways. So Stewardia gets really finicky, especially in places where there's a lot of heat. I recommend definitely using shade cloth. That'll help keeping the tree a little bit more protected. I have my Stewardias in the one spot in the garden that gets a few more hours of shade than everything else. They're still under 50% shade cloth, but they get the first few hours in the morning. They're not in the sun, so
They're all the way at the back.
they're all the way at the back,
Yeah.
kind of against the hedge, and so they don't get they get a few less hours of sun than other plants, and they seem to like that more. Stewardias and high amounts of light, especially in combination with heat, don't do well. But just like a few tips, if you have a weak tree, what can you do? We talked about fertilizing more. That's definitely something that I do. If you have a tree that's not thriving, one of my tricks is that I'll use full strength Miracle Grow. So I skip the microdosing. I microdose it throughout the week, but once a week, once every other week, I'll come in and do full strength Miracle Grow until I see that plant lush, thriving, vigorous again. So definitely hit it strong. There's some people who say, don't fertilize when you have a weak tree. In my experience, I've saved and resurrected a lot of nice old weak trees here. I've always done that by fertilizing with a strong product, very frequently, and that's always, that's saved almost everything.
But you're managing heat and light intensity with shade cloth and positioning the garden, and you're also watching your watering smartly.
Yes, so watering is a big thing when you have a weak tree. I think it's really hard to overwater a tree that's vigorous and healthy, but if you have a tree that's struggling, then overwatering can be detrimental to the plant. So one of the things that we do if we have a weak tree here is we get like a little 2x4 or 1x1, and we put that underneath the pot. So we tip the pot up. What that's going to do is just push,
So tip it up kind of. One end of the pot is higher than
the
the
one
other
end of the pot is higher than the other.
Right.
It's at a very slight angle, and that's going to the gravity is going to push a lot more water out of that pot.
What are we hoping to observe as a success from that strategy?
We want the tree to dry out more, and so if you have a weak tree,
faster.
Yeah, increasing the wet-dry cycle will definitely improve and increase health. And so we want the tree to dry out more. Weak trees tend to just sit there kind of wet on the side of the bench. So when you have a weak tree, you really want to be careful not to overwater them. And a way to speed up the watering frequency is using that
Right.
little break.
And maybe watering less frequently.
Watering less frequently, yeah.
Right.
So maybe that tree gets skipped every day.
So wait for the green light, help it evacuate water quicker.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question is from Roderick. This is about growing seedlings into decent trunks. How do we balance extension versus cutback for taper and movement? So on the one hand, we need extension for girth. On the other hand, we need to make sections of taper and movement in the trunk line. Would you trunk chop and repot every year? Would you put it in the ground and let it go for 5 years, or something in between? This is actually a really deep topic.
All right, growing trunks. Let's take these kind of one by one. Give me the first part of the question again.
Balancing extension versus cutback for tapers. So sometimes we need to extend, but sometimes we do need to finally cut and make sections of that. So
usually you're making your first cut once the tree's at least 50% as thick as what you want it to. You really do want that first cut to be at a point once the base of the trunk is pretty good. Otherwise, if you try and cut in later times, it's really, really hard to thicken up the overall part of the tree. So letting your plant run until the trunk is kind of most of the way there, then doing your first cut, and then a few rounds of subsequent cuts will improve the rest of the trunk staple to create a top. But imagine, like, you know, the bottom half of the tree is kind of one level of taper, then you grow the next half as another one, and then the final half is another one.
Final third.
Final third, yeah.
And then the next one was trunk chop every year, repot every year, put it in the ground, let it go for 5 years. I think here in Oregon we've observed professional growers never doing in-ground stints for more than like 2.5, 3 years, because after that things really start to go out of control.
Yeah, if you're putting something in the ground, it assumes digging it up frequently. So the ground is a really, really great tool, and probably people should be using it more. However, it is going to amplify problems more quickly. And so it's something that you just want to keep in mind. Planting it in the ground doesn't mean just planting it and forgetting it, because we also want to be working, and this is really, really important, we want to be working on the nabari when we grow trunks, not just the trunks themselves. If you're not doing any work on the nabari takes almost as long as the rest of the bonsai to kind of, you know, materialize.
And it makes itself look crappy at an alarmingly fast rate. If
does.
it's already crappy, it's just going to get crappier.
Amplifying
Yeah,
that.
you're amplifying the badness in it.
So you want to be digging it up, working on the nabari, which is going to slow down the overall thickening of the trunk, but it's going to improve the overall quality of the bonsai. Yeah. So,
and you've got that race car of putting it in the ground. So
that's right.
You've got a bit of license to do heavy edits to the roots or whatever you need to do before
right.
putting it back in the ground. Okay, let's move on to a question from Ryan Matt. For developing trees that can handle defoliation, this is going to be a couple questions.
Yeah.
For developing trees that can handle defoliation, RAKUYO encourages removing all leaves across the entire tree, but we're leaving sacrifice branches and extensions on branches that need to thicken and develop. So far, so good. What is the downside to leaving those branches undefoliated? Yeah,
so the more you defoliate, the more stress response you create. And so you want to, if you're going to defoliate, you know, it takes a lot of energy for the tree to come back. You really want to remove all the leaves so that there's a stronger stress response. That doesn't mean that there's not the occasional time where we leave, you know, a weak branch undefoliated, where we leave, you know, little tiny weak shoots undefoliated. But if you're not doing like an 80% defoliation of the plant or more,
you might not even trigger the stress response, I guess.
Yeah. So like you can't just defoliate one branch and expect the process to work. It's kind of like decandling. If you just decandle one branch and not the rest of the tree, the pine just might be like, I don't care about that one.
Yeah.
And so you really, the more you do, the more stress response you create, and the more kind of the tree comes back pretty vigorously.
So Ryan Matt asks, would that concentrate growth in the branches that are still leafed, while the buds in the defoliated branches activate? That is kind of the idea, right? We are one of the things I think that is missed when we answer this type of question, because this type of question is asked quite a bit, is there's a component of experience, like years of doing it, doing an 80-20, seeing that was just right, or doing a 60-30 or 60-40 and saying, oh no, we should have gone harder. That's just something that you do next year and that you know after a while.
Yeah.
You know, 5 years of defoliation, you start to kind of see, if you're really interested in a particular species, where the balance is. You should have left more, you should have taken off more. There's an experience factor to it, right?
There is.
There isn't a one size.
And defoliation is not something that's just rinse and repeated every year. There's 3 factors for whether a tree can be defoliated. Number 1, it has to be the right species. So you don't want to defoliate a beech, but a trident maple or a ficus, totally fine. But not every trident maple or ficus can be defoliated. So number 2 and 3, number 2 is it needs to be a really vigorous plant. You don't want to defoliate something that's weak. You don't want to defoliate something that has just little tiny extensions. You need the tree to have a lot of vigor.
In a low vigor scenario where we defoliated 80%, we left some sacrifice stuff that did have leaf on it, but it was weak.
Yeah.
Is that a dangerous scenario where now maybe the defoliated part doesn't respond as much, but then the left strong part really pushes. Is that something
It can
that
be.
happens?
It can be. It's not always, but it definitely can be. And then number 3 with things that the defoliation requirements is it needs to be a relatively young plant. We tend not to defoliate like very mature late stage bonsai. Even in Japan, they like at Takayama's garden and the deciduous garden at Fuyuan, they don't fully defoliate the trident maples there anymore that are a couple generations old. They're kind of switching to leaf cutting and other processes.
Right. So that actually goes back to when we say defoliation here on this channel.
It means the entire leaf is removed.
Yeah, everything, although except for if you have that sacrifice bit, you have that leader that you want to keep. That still counts where you're saying for more elder trees, we want to just do reduction, like half.
Total removal of the leaf, yep. Versus leaf cutting is when we remove part of the leaf, and we have a whole episode on that we just put out.
And then one last bit on this from Ryan Matt is, does it make a difference if it's an apical sacrifice branch or a low primary branch when we are doing this scenario of defoliating everything but the sacrifice?
Yeah, if it's an apical sacrifice branch and you're growing an apically strong plant like a tree, you could get in a scenario where if your sacrifice branch is so incredibly strong that if you don't defoliate that and you defoliate everything down low, that there's not enough power down low to come back from the defoliation because that sacrifice branch is zapping so much energy from the plant. And if you ever find yourself in that scenario, something you can easily do if you're like, oh crap, that this is too strong, you can just cut the sacrifice branch. And cutting the sacrifice branch prematurely, even if you don't want to, can then push a lot of energy into the bottom part of the plant. So if you're ever in a oh no scenario, but one of the best things about having a sacrifice branch is it's such a good energy drain. That's why on almost every black pine where you're going a trunk, going back to that previous question, when you have that sacrifice branch, and on your young black pine, your young Japanese maple, the inner nodes of that pine or maple down below are going to be really short because that sacrifice branch is getting all the power. So it's like one of the best ways to slow a tree down is have a sacrifice branch, and because it just gives incredible power to distract the energy of the tree away from the stuff that we're trying to keep really compact and small and put it in something useful that's thickening up something that we care about.
So we're saying, respond to the stress. Here's a big stress signal. But don't over-respond. Big cuts, big response, as we've heard.
And that's why it's so important to read the tree in front of you. That's why I really like to talk about defoliation as something that you can only do in certain times versus leaf cutting you can do on every single plant. You really have to read the tree to determine, what to do, when to do it, and how much to do it. The tips or the techniques of bonsai are relatively simple. Everything that we do, leaf cutting, defoliation, even wiring, once you get some practice, is not hard to learn. But knowing when to do it and how to do it, that's the kind of hard part of bonsai is learning how to read the tree and respond to what you see in front of you.
Yeah, there is an element of experience to it. This is actually one of those things that kind of pushes me to maybe focus a little bit more on a smaller number of species that I get good at. Rather than kind of taking the everything bagel approach and having one of every species, because this is the only way I can really notice subtle differences between my trees is by growing a bunch of the same type of tree, trying different things.
You'll learn 10 times faster doing that. Versus if you have a collection of 50 trees of 50 different species, you're going to learn at a very, very, very slow rate. That's not bad to have that, but it's
harder to suss out these details of balance of 80-20 versus 70-30 versus...
the guy who has 50 black pines is going to learn a lot more than the guy who has 50 one of everythings.
So moving on to more growing strategy questions. We've got a couple questions from a series of derps related to poodling and sacrifices again. So series of derps wants us to elaborate on the concept of poodling.
So what, just for our audience, Maciek, you've kind of coined this term, so I'm going to ask you, what is poodling?
So poodling is a situation where we have a long sacrificial leader somewhere, or it's either a leader at the top of the tree, a big pole coming out of the top of the tree, or it's a sacrifice branch somewhere elsewhere on the tree. And what we've done is we've kept a lot of foliage and branches on the end of that sacrifice leader, but somewhere in between the part of the tree that we're keeping and the end of that, we've stripped everything else. So it ends up looking like a poodle tail where the first part of the tail is 80% no fur, and then the very end is a
that
poodle.
Westminster, very manicured poodle tail.
So it's really just managing sacrifice branches and the stripping of their foliage. Where do we strip and all that stuff? That's kind of what this topic is.
So what do you want to know about poodling?
So just stripping the sacrifice branch of its lower branches, i.e. the sacrifice branch that we have, just stripping the parts that are closer to the part of the tree that we're keeping.
Yep.
How does that impact the rest of the tree?
Yeah, so the reason that we poodle, and there's you shouldn't always poodle, but the reason that we do poodle is that when that sacrifice branch is so strong, well, two reasons. Removing foliage can strengthen the lower part of the tree. This is for when you have we have a black pine out here in the garden that has a 7-year-old sacrifice branch. It's probably at least 7 feet tall as well.
It's really tall.
It's massive, and so the reason that we poodle that is the lower part of the tree can get weak. The branches that I'm decandling down low, the internodes can get so short that I might not be able to decandle. So removing all that foliage except for the end bud is going to help that end bud not. And all the branches that were on that not steal energy from the low parts of the tree. Makes the bottom of the tree stronger. The other reason that we poodle is it removes ramification off our sacrifice branch. And when we remove ramification off our sacrifice branch and concentrate it into one strong runner, what that's going to do is encourage that runner to grow at a faster rate of speed. So we're thickening at, say, 100 miles an hour versus 20 miles an hour if we have 10, 15 branches coming off of there.
So it's almost like we have the keep part of the tree, which we're turning into a finer and finer and more complicated structure.
That's right.
And then we have the sacrificial part of the tree, which we're kind of almost pathologically keeping very coarse and simple.
Yeah.
Especially in pines. And I've seen shohin growers of pines in Japan, where they even, when you get that little explosion of buds at the top, they remove everything but the one, just so the tree continues to just grow the singular.
You want
pole.
one strong central line.
Now, I have not seen that on deciduous trees here a lot, but
it still happens.
If you zoom out, if you kind of blur your eyes and zoom out and see the whole strategy, it's still kind of what we're doing. We're still simplifying it.
Same thing. We want one long central line to really run, and so you'll remove ramification on them. The only time that you don't want to poodle your sacrifice branch is if you're just getting started with a sacrifice. Let's say you're just starting something as a small runner. You're trying to get that big.
Sticks and pots.
Sticks and pots, or even a big trunk in a pot that you're just trying to start a new sacrifice branch on. Leaving a few strong shoots can actually help build momentum on that sacrifice branch and thicken up. So when you're just getting started, kind of year 1 or 2 of a sacrifice, you might not do any poodling, but after that, that's when you really start. Once that thing starts taking off, catching up on the fact that it's allowed to grow stronger than the rest of the plant, then you can start refining it to one central line. But when you're just getting started, leave a few branches up there so that the tree gets the idea.
Yeah, this actually goes into the next question from series of derps, which is, do we remove the side growth as it emerges, like real time, or do we strip it once it has reached the desired height? Like, when do we do it? I've noticed that we strip the sacrifice growth sort of late. We've benefited from it a little bit.
Right? Doing it in fall, I think, is a great time. So every fall, what we do, we bring the plant in, we take it down to one kind of central leader, we pull a bunch of needles or leaves if you have a broadleaf evergreen, and then you thin out that leader, which might have if it's a pine, might have 5 candles. If it's a deciduous tree, might just have some ramification on the end, and that's when you thin it down to just a few.
And if you were to do like a time lapse, or you took a photo at Christmas every year of that tree, you might see that poodle just moving up into the sky. Right, but if you were to take that picture earlier in the year, it might still be quite busy.
There'd be a lot of needles or leaves on there. There'd be some side shoots coming off just at the end, not kind of on the middle part of the poodle tail.
And then, is there a difference between a high poodle or a lowly leafed out sacrifice branch? Putting it up there, putting it down there.
Yeah, if your goal is thickening the trunk, it should always be from the top. If your goal is to thicken up a branch, then it can come off of the end of whatever branch you're trying to thicken off. But you always have a sacrifice from the end rather than somewhere in the middle of what you're trying to thicken, because you don't want things to thicken kind of disproportionately. And that just keeps, if it's at the top of your tree or at the end of your branch, it's thickening up all the nice taper that you have kind of further back on the plant kind of equally.
Is there any merit to the idea of doing like, a sacrifice kind of level at the, first branch of your tree? If you found that the taper wasn't enough, you want to just to thicken that lower segment?
Well, the thing that can screw you is some trees like a beech will actually form kind of like a collar where the branch comes off the trunk. So you can have like a little bit of reverse taper built in if you have a sacrifice run on a branch for too long.
So you gotta be kind of like engineering level strategic about this if you're gonna risk that.
Yeah, so it's not something, again, for thickening the trunk, it's not something we necessarily want to do.
Okay. Now we get into some miscellaneous category questions.
All right.
So the first one was from Robert, who asked, what was the tree that we were growing in the ground behind us here somewhere?
Yeah, he was probably just talking about one of the Niwaki or garden trees.
And is it growing in the ground, or is it in the gravel, or rooted deep into the ground? Like, what's the planting there?
Yeah. So my garden is all basalt gravel for the top 7 inches of the substrate. Underneath that, I have weed fabric, and then underneath that is just dirt.
So the weed fabric is some kind of tough nylon, woven nylon that blocks everything from underneath.
That's right. Yeah.
So we don't get weeds in the.
Yeah. So that was the first thing I laid down. Then put 7 inches of gravel on top of that. Now the trees are growing into the gravel, but when I plant something in the garden, I pull the gravel back. I find my weed fabric. I cut a ring into that, a nice big circle, and then I plop my root ball into that. So they're growing both above in the gravel, and they're growing below into the actual dirt. And so that's how everything in the garden is kind of situated. Now, I do have a lot of trees in the garden, and they provide a couple benefits to bonsai. Number one, it makes the garden look good to just have a lot of nice lush plants around. It makes it feel more like a garden than a very sterile kind of space.
There's a bunch of viburnums scattered through, some maybe
a
witch
bunch
hazel.
of viburnums, a bunch of camellias, 2 broadleaf evergreens, because everything's deciduous in the winter, so I want to see a little bit of green and some existence of plants back here. And then I have a lot of Japanese maples and beech kind of planted around as well. Not just because I love Japanese maples, but having a lot of plants in and around your bonsai, it makes the space more of a microclimate. It creates better growing conditions for your trees. Before I had all that, when we would have a heat wave here, this garden would just bake. When it was just like benches and gravel and nothing else, it was kind of an oven back here. And having all the plants around, it really provides a cooling effect, makes a little microclimate for our trees. So it doesn't just look good, but it behaves very well.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the strategy. I forget the name of the Japanese horticulturalist that pioneered this method, but what he does is he goes to places like deserts and things like that, or very challenging places, cities, deserts, whatever, and he'll plant in very small plantings, like 25 feet by 25 feet or 30 feet by 30 feet. He'll cram just a crazy number of plants together, and they create their own sort of bootstrap microforest, that's highly survivable and stable as a result of being so tightly integrated to each other and having each other to kind of sort of lean on in very, very challenging conditions. And I see a little bit of that here, is that when you have so much stuff together,
it really helps.
There's a lot of heat absorption, there's a lot of shade making.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see this, do cuttings. Like if you plant like a bunch of cuttings, like really spaced out, they're not going to do well. But if you like pack as many into an Anderson flat as you can possibly fit in there, you'll have a much higher success rate.
I always do congested cuttings now.
Congested cuttings are the way to go. So having plants close together really helps. Having some garden plants around your bonsai really helps. Obviously, they can get crazy and maybe not good for the plant if it's shading out or whatnot, but having them in the space, creating a little bit of a microclimate, really, really helps the plant. I read a study once that like a mature beech tree can like put 500 gallons of water a day into the surrounding area by getting it out of the leaves, transpiring. And so they really, we don't have mature plants like that around here, but these trees are helping.
And then finally, our last question is from B Swift. What type of lift table are we using? And I think that's this lift table, right?
Yeah, the hydraulic cart. This is the reason that I can have big trees in the garden. This does all the heavy lifting. I just basically push things off the bench onto the cart, off the cart onto a bench.
So this is a Pittsburgh brand hydraulic table cart?
Yeah, but it's really just a Harbor Freight cart. So go to Harbor Freight, get a hydraulic cart. Now, the tricky thing is none of these have nice wheels. So if you're just on, concrete, then they'll work just fine. But if you don't have concrete, these like pneumatic wheels are really, really important. There was a company that was doing these. I think it was Roger Lehman was custom modifying this wheel kit, and so he would either sell the kit to how to do it, or he would just do it for you. And so a lot of people got them from him. I think his company was Mecca Bonsai. And so that's where I got this cart. I got it as a pre-configured, already done kind of thing. And I'm not sure he's around anymore. He might have been acquired by Superfly or sold his inventory to Superfly. And so yeah, I'm not sure what the state of that is.
So to get to the point where you have a sort of gravel-ready, all-terrain hydraulic table, some modification was required.
Modification is required.
They're more made for like warehouses and things like that.
Although you can do the modification yourself. I've never done it. I don't know how to do it, but like I've heard stories of people going to Harbor Freight, buying these carts and figuring out a way to do it. So if you're pretty handy, or you know someone who is, I'm sure they can figure it out. Yeah,
I don't think I could handle having a garden like this if I didn't have one of these.
Yeah, it's such a good, it's like the best, most other than the Dosatron, like that thing helps this garden thrive.
A tree like this that we have on the table here is easy to lift, but most of those other trees are either two-person lifts, or if you're alone most of the time, which most of us are in our garden, you have to have this, or you're going to break something. You're going to tear a muscle.
I'm known for liking very big trees, so the hydraulic cart is how we kind of manage that. So.
That's all the questions we have.
That's all the questions. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. This was a super fun episode. We appreciate everybody who dropped a question. If you have more questions, drop them into our comment section, and we'll be sure to either answer them on YouTube or get to them in a future episode. We also just want to say thank you to everybody who watches our podcast. I've been hearing a lot, and I think you have too online, from a lot of people who really, really value what we're doing, and it's really nice to hear from people that they appreciate it, that they're getting something out of this.
Yeah, we're not on autopilot. Like, we are kind of guided by what people are interested in. So
that's right. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already, hit the bell icon and subscribe to our channel. That really helps us out. And click the little thumbs up if you enjoyed this episode. You've been watching the Deciduous Bonsai podcast. I'm Andrew.
I'm Maciek.
And we'll see you next episode.